Welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know The Last of Us. It's our deep dive on season 2, episode 4. My name is Grace Leeder, but of course I'm not alone. I'm here with Taran Armstrong. Taran, how you doing?
Very scared of the pots and pans in a way that Big Brother never taught me to be.
That's true. They're very nice, but you don't get that nice cookery in the Big Brother house, I don't think.
I would hope not. It's apparently very dangerous.
Yeah, very dangerous. All right, Taran, day 1 is the name of the episode of the 4th episode of season 2, but it's day 1 in Seattle for Ellie and Deena. Mike and I chatted through our sort of immediate reactions last night, so I'll hand the floor over to you and ask you what you thought of the episode.
I thought it was very good. I think that I have one primary major criticism.
Yeah.
And not to tease the listeners, it's the stuff at the end, the immunity reveal, the pregnancy reveal stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was a little clunky. I'm sure we'll talk more about it throughout the podcast, but most of the stuff before that I thought was pretty phenomenal. The action scenes, the Isaac stuff, I really liked.
Yeah, what's funny is I think that I felt like that. My immediate reaction was like, oh, I don't think this is working how I think that they are hoping it will work. And I feel like it's clunky. And then talking through it with Mike, I feel like the more forgiving I was of it, in the sense that they are like, they're not teens, but they're young adults, I guess, is maybe a good way to describe them. And felt, young adults who also grew up in like a post-apocalyptic world and can forgive some of the like maybe immaturity that I was feeling in the way things got unveiled and told to each other in a way that I didn't think worked, but was more forgiving of it after talking through it with Mike. So it'll be interesting, I think, to talk through it with you and to see if like, am I there, or will I kind of like revert back? And is there I often feel like this talking with each other. I feel like you have your finger on the pulse of like the theme of this story incredibly well. And so not that I'm always like, oh, and then I agree with Taran now, but they are very good points, So excited to chat about this one with you.
I think it's fun that you have a podcast before this, because like you have like these previous thoughts, and I feel like interestingly we're often not like opposed to each other with our opinions, but we have like different interpretations of things, which I think is very fun.
I think that has been my thing doing Tastemaker. It's coming up on a year, Taran, not to, sound the alarm on our 1 year Tastemakers anniversary. But I do feel like over the year, I have learned that I think like, not to completely put ourselves in these buckets, but I'm a little bit more of glass half full, and you might be a little bit more glass half empty to a degree, that I think actually makes for a great dynamic, because I'm sort of like maybe forever the optimist, and you're not always. This makes you sound like you're so angry and mad all the time, but I think
you're right. But I think on this podcast particularly, I've mostly been the optimist.
I agree. This is what I was going to get to. I think this one we've been flipped a little bit, where I'm like, I want it to be real dark and sad and angry all the time. And you're like, I guess it was the thing. Like I feel like I really came to appreciate the Jackson set piece for not just being a set piece, for you linking it thematically, like spores under the earth, Taran. But yeah, this one in particular, I think is interesting. I mean, the one thing that I will say thus far that I'm a little bit not surprised, but it's certainly noticeable. We are very much like, this is on Ellie and Deena. This is their story, specifically for the last 2 episodes since Joel's death. This is their story. Are you feeling like, what is your take on that? Do you feel like you're enjoying that we're not trying to intersperse a lot? I mean, this week we do have the Isaac stuff. Last week we obviously had what was last week the episode where they leave? Was last week the
Yes.
So obviously there was like town stuff, but it really seems focused in.
This is a very focused episode. It's it's called Day 1. It's basically the story of the day, with just a bit of Isaac stuff interspersed, which I don't think is too unfamiliar for Last of Us viewers. And certainly if you played the game, I don't think it would be that surprising either. I think that, and we may have more to say a little bit later, but I think that we had been anticipating that they might not do this, and that they might take a different approach. But this episode to me seems to confirm that they are taking this approach, and we are really just focusing in on Deena and Ellie here. I have, I think, different thoughts on that. I think as an episode, it worked here. I think that I'm usually a fan of like honing in and focusing a story, especially if you can give it like a time like constraint like this. Like this is day one. Like what does that mean? Right. And it means, oh, where this is a day in the life, right? I think that's very fun. And I think that the way that the story unfolds in this episode, we're slowly learning more about the wolves and the Saraphites and the city. And then, getting into to the action that they do. I thought all of that worked really well. I think that perhaps, again, the biggest downside is that with focusing so much on these two characters, spending the day with them, and it only being one day, it does feel like they packed a lot into the final scene of the episode. But I think more to say on that with more spoilers.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I ultimately, in terms of like what they're trying to accomplish this episode, I do think, so much of season one is Ellie and Joel, and like I think like people might forget how much we were like, okay, we're doing this first thing, and then we're going to Kansas City, and we're dealing with this thing, and then we're, like there really was this like segmented adventure-y thing of like really sticking with Ellie and Joel to the point there's many characters who pop in through season one who we do not continue on with, mostly because they die. But that's a reason to not have the character be on the show anymore. And I feel like because of the setup work they needed to do, with Joel's death, the Deena and Ellie stuff just has taken a little bit longer to get going. And what I do like about this episode, even if I don't think it's the most effective way to have done it, is last week the episode ends with the threat of the WLF, right? Like it's them marching through the streets. And it's like a little bit like they don't really know what they've gotten themselves into. What I liked about this episode is not only ramping up that and maybe, in a way that I thought like, I really sort of was nitpicky about that it wasn't character enough for me last week. Well, I think that changed completely as we can talk about Isaac and the way that his character is introduced in this episode that feels like a tremendous threat and representative of the battle that's going on, but deeply rooted in character. But we also have to develop like Ellie and Deena and why they are, choosing to be together, why they're doing this, and sort of like the things that they didn't yet know about each other that we'll learn by the end of the episode. And so I can quibble with the way the information got presented to us, but I actually think I agree with this is the episode to sort of like stop down and explore Ellie and Deena sort of together in this, as like sort of everything around them seems more dangerous than they even thought.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do we want to start with Isaac? We get
Let's
a
start with Isaac.
flashback. Mike and I chatted. This was a little bit reminiscent of what we maybe thought in season one might be a more common appearance, which is a flashback, because I think it's the first 2 or 3 episodes that start with flashbacks. And we get one here where we are going to be introduced. It's funny enough to Josh Peck is on the show, kind of a hilarious, interesting cameo here. And these soldiers and Isaac's going to quickly teach them a lesson by telling them some stuff, and then he's going to teach them a lesson by tossing a grenade into a tank and blowing all but one of them up. Taran, it's a pretty stunning introduction to Isaac, played by Jeffrey Wright here.
Yeah, I saw a bunch of people talking about the Josh Peck appearance. And I'm not like the biggest Drake and Josh.
I gotta say I'm also not really the biggest Drake and Josh person either, but he is for a certain I think to be different, like a younger millennial, he is a kind of a big deal. But
like he's an actor, isn't he?
He is an actor. It's not like he's not.
That's why it's weird to me that it was look it's Josh Peck as a cameo in this. It's like this isn't like the singer dude in Game of Thrones, like who's not an actor. He's just like an acting gig.
It's just an acting gig. I do think Josh Peck typically comes with a little bit more of like a comedic tone, which is like the scene does. They are supposed to kind of like be immature bullies, kind of.
Like Big Head was in the when this is in the flashback of the premiere. You know what I mean? We didn't
Extremely
like, oh,
true.
it's Big Head cameo.
I kind of was. I kind of like, oh, that's Big Head.
Maybe.
Except the one thing that like completely holds up on your point is that Josh Peck was also in Oppenheimer, which like I know like a million people were in Oppenheimer, but he's in one of the most
Right.
serious movies of the last like 2 to 3 years. Yeah.
Anyway, the scene itself, I thought was great. I thought it was really, really well done. I mean, we both just saw the movie Warfare, which was a very sort of grounded, realistic depiction of an event that happened in the U.S. military. And like the soldiers and the way that they talk to each other, like it just kind of tracked. Like this kind of made sense to me. It felt like natural dialogue, the story that was being told, the callousness with which it was told, the explanation that they are called voters as a way to mock them because their vote was taken away. And like I think something else too is that like when you do something like this, you're trying to make soldiers feel evil, feel bad. You will often kind of like veer far too into the mustache twirliness of it. But this felt like, unfortunately, an actual story that might actually be told by soldiers in a military. And it told in a way that was funny if you're not appalled by the lack of humanity in it. And maybe Josh Peck, a comedian, is a good way to do that. But this felt like a realistic thing to do. And so that then to have Jeffrey Wright as Isaac come in and be like, no, like this is, do you know why? Like, this is why they call them voters. And to like shut it down, thoughtless, and then subsequently leave the truck and chuck a grenade back in was definitely, I think, a fun way to introduce this character, especially with the little mini arc that we have for his character in this episode, where we get where he is now 11 years later. And of course, him like taking the rookie out of the car too, I thought was an interesting touch. Man, I guess the beginning of the WLF pretty creepy. Just kind of walking up.
Yeah, very creepy. Man, Isaac Wright is just so good. I mean, it's like there is such a like gravitas to him as a person of like I would do literally anything he tells me.
Righteous violence, right? He is morally superior to them. They have taken away the rights of people. They are bashing their teeth in. They are the villains. And so him being righteous, he is justified in chucking a grenade into that car, and for everything that they're about to do to Fedra. As we see 11 years later, Fedra has been wiped out in this city, and so I think that is like a very important point of not only Isaac's story but of the story of the season in general.
Well, you know what you say, like he has the right to do, and I don't mean to like respond to this and like I actually don't disagree with you, but I also think there's a world where you could totally argue like that actually isn't right. They're like they're
no,
young.
Yeah, I'm saying it from his perspective.
From his perspective. Right. Okay, great. So yeah, I like all of the, I like this, just the scene, and he's going to meet this woman. We talked about it on the recap podcast. This is the mom from Euphoria. I don't have the name of the character in front of me. Actually, kind of little bit of a fun fact in terms of Jeffrey Wright is only the second person in this show, I believe, to be playing the same character they voiced in the video game. So I believe
Firefly.
Marlene, who played Merle, is or Merle Dandridge, who played Marlene, is the first, and he's the second. So it's kind of fun. And they're going to develop, basically, you presume that this is the beginning of the WLF, and then we cut forward in time. I got very confused. I said this last night. I got very confused, but it says 11 years later. And I was like, I feel like there had to be a cleaner way to say that it was
that was a
present day,
little.
but it's
I
fine.
agree with you. I mean, it took me about 2 seconds,
2 seconds, of
maybe
course,
less, to like be like, oh, I get what they're doing.
Yes.
But yes, seeing 11 years later was a bit of a like, wait, what?
Just put the time, just put the year, put the actual year that it is in the show, I think. But whatever, it's fine.
I mean, I think you do want to convey that it's been 11 years, and if you just put the year, then maybe people miss the original year, and then they have to do math, and so like there's. I mean, I get. I think the biggest issue is that there needed to be like an establishing shot under the 11 years later.
Agreed. Let's stay on Isaac just because I think that we can, and then we can go back to Ellie and Deena's story. But we get this torture scene where he is warming up the plate. I think this is great. As this is exactly where I'm like, oh, fun, and it's a torture scene, and it's horrific. Where he's heating up these like this beautiful cookery set that is there, and he's ultimately going to burn the guy's hand with it, and the back and forth between the two of them, of just the philosophical disagreement, and then the way that like when he turns back the second time the guy's hand is out. I thought all of this is just like exceptionally done.
Taran. This reminded me a lot of the introduction to Tywin Lannister in Game of Thrones, right. But kind of the inverse, where like Tywin was doing something that felt very violent but wasn't, and Isaac is doing something that feels very not violent. Taking a pan, cooking it, heating it up, essentially.
Having dreams of having this type of in his house, presumably.
Exactly. And he's talking about cooking for women and like, and like all of the stuff in that speech too, I think, can help inform who Isaac is. And sort of the way that he now like wields power and reaps the rewards of that. And then, heating up the pan, and going over to the Saraphite. We know that they're called Saraphites. That is what they call themselves. But they are referred to by the WLF as scars. And he's calling them the scars, and the Saraphite is correcting, no, we're Saraphites. And like, of course, this is just a direct continuation of 11 years prior. It is the fact that these soldiers are mocking the civilians by calling them voters that he takes issue with. One of the things he takes issue with. And now here he is 11 years later, torturing a man and calling him a scar. And then on top of that, the Saraphite, in a very badass way, explains to Isaac, you're not going to win. And Isaac's like, what do you mean you're not? Like, we have all the guns, we have all the manpower. You're running around with bows and arrows. You can't win. And the Saraphite says, well, no, we can, because every day one of you becomes one of us, essentially. Turns and becomes a Saraphite, but the Saraphite never become wolves. And you can see that this gets to Isaac, because again, this is exactly what happened with Isaac in Fedra. He turned on Fedra because of what they were doing, and he became a wolf. And now there are wolves who are becoming Saraphites, and this mirror held up to him is very frustrating. Clearly, he goes back to the fire, but by the time he turns around, the Saraphite's already holding his hand up. And just what a great scene. What a great two scenes as an introduction to a character to basically explain everything about who this man is, and his hypocrisy, his evolution, where he stands now, to go back to like the, outside the door, there's two guards there, and one of them is the rookie from 11 years prior, who has now so clearly been indoctrinated and is just as bad, if not worse, than the soldiers from that car 11 years ago. And that is very clearly due to Isaac. Great stuff. I love this.
Yeah, this is this is about, I think, as like as as good of a giving of information without feeling like that was an exposition dump. Like it doesn't really like. I guess it is. It is all to like fill in backstory, but it just doesn't feel like it at all. And it's an incredibly powerful scene. I think that not only do we get all the information, but we again, what I think the show does better than almost any other show on right now is character work. It understands its characters and their motivations and why they act and how they act. And this is a really good example of that in the way that all the stuff you're saying of like the way that Isaac clearly has, he's being a hypocrite based on what we saw in the first scene to what he's doing now, the way that the young soldier has been indoctrinated into this as well. It's all just extremely compelling stuff. I think, at least.
Yeah, great stuff. And I think it also like bleeds into the action of the rest of the episode well as well. I go back to how we were introduced to the Seraphites, which I guess was just last episode. I love it because we're introduced to them. We're introduced to, like, as Isaac says, the more sane ones, who are like, the prophet is not some deity. She was just a person who had good things to say. And there's a cute little girl, and it's just like, oh, it's like Joel and Ellie. And they get murdered by the WLF, or at least that's what's implied. And oh man, Abby's one of them too. And so they must be the worst, and they kind of are. And then we see that, they seemed to have some somewhat noble origins at the very least. Only 11 years later, now they're torturing these Seraphites. And there's a hint there, like, you're killing children. Well, you're killing children too. Well, you started it. And then to then go from that to the scene at the television station later, it's like, oh, like these perhaps are not quite as defenseless and innocent as we were led to believe, which it is not necessarily a statement on the morality of what's happening, but more so just a little bit of a turn, a little bit of like oh, okay, this is something a little bit different than what I thought it might have been.
I mean that stuff, that there's some very, I feel like there's some very, like, I don't think they're trying to be modern in it, but there is this, like, there's a history, of like the way in which, actually maybe a better example than what I'm thinking about timely is the way in which, like, I got very frustrated when there was during 2020, during the riots, and these people on, I feel like mostly the right were, and there's some condemning of like riot, but it's like why are they doing that? It's like, because it's years of pent up frustration, and so they do something that, yes, of course, is like over the line, which in this, in the show version is like hanging them up doing it, but it's like, it's because of the, the look at what he is doing to them as well. So I just think it's like, it's a very, it feels like so real. I think the way that like they're playing out this battle between the two, which I also like, I am interested. I didn't rewatch season 1 heading into season 2. I know that the Kansas City stuff was more fleshed out in the show than it was in the video game, and I am wondering whether or not, like, people who went and rewatched it, how much there is, like, just in terms of, I feel like it would be very easy to like to do that, and then in this one you want to make it feel different, and I think the biggest piece of that is like, you had, I can't remember what Melanie Linsky's character's name was in season 1, but that felt so much about personal revenge, which is interesting because like there's this side story of, and not side story, the main story of this thing is the revenge story of like, this is why Ellie and Deena are going there, but that's not what this like central conflict between the WLF and the Seraphites in Seattle is about. So I compliment the show in the way to say that, like, they've managed to make actually 2 stories about like control over a city actually feel very different, even through 1 episode of this conflict here. I guess 2. Anything else on Isaac, or should we move over to Ellie and Deena's day in Seattle?
Let's move over to their day.
So they're gonna wander through, make, for my money, way too much noise.
Oh, I mean, first, yeah, they get a pregnancy test, multiple pregnancy tests, then they make too much. I mean, listen, I've seen some complaints about this. that they're making too much noise. I hear some of it for sure. I think the best sort of defense is, they actually do try to address it when Ellie closes the tank lid and it makes a huge noise, and then Deena says like, "Hey, you just proved that clearly nobody's around," which is like fair enough.
Yeah.
That said, it was still a little bit of a wrinkle. This is a stupid thing, but like when the lid closed and Deena stood in the middle of the street holding the gun and then turning around and holding the gun the other way, because in my brain as I'm watching this, because it's so like set accurate to the game, I'm like, if I did this in the game and I was playing as Deena, I would be running for cover right now in case somebody did show up, maybe from multiple. I'm not going to be standing in the middle of the street.
Very true. Yep.
So just tiny things here or there. They're not big deals though, at least not to me, because
Yeah.
again, like we're here to service the plot, the characters, and I would like for little details like this to not wrinkle, but it's not the biggest deal, especially when they do make attempts to sort of hand wave it away, like, "Oh, you just proved that nobody's here."
Yeah, I think I'm fine. I think as long as they say like, "Hey, you idiot, you made too much noise," like I'm good. I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm good with it. It doesn't matter, the
I
amount
think
of like shooting you do in a video game and like people don't
yeah.
immediately, like I think it's fine. Yeah.
I think the other thing I've seen is just how clean they are, which I
Yeah,
think is kind of valid. It's not something that I was like consciously noticing, but I was occasionally being like, man, they look really like cool. And like, but like, something feels off in almost in how cool they look. And I think the answer to that was, oh yeah, they're a bit too clean, a bit too like made up and
Yeah.
just like looking perfect.
Yeah.
Which again, not the biggest deal in the world, and also something that might be intentional, because as we progress through the season, maybe they get dirtier and more disheveled.
Right.
But it was a little bit of a wrinkle.
Yeah, that's fair. So we're gonna have the music store scene, which, as people pointed out, it's a pretty faithful, recreation of the scene from the video game where Ellie will discover the guitar and the guitar strings. There's a really great note. I saw someone point out, I believe it was Stuart, friend of the pod, who noticed that there's a thing from last week's episode that the guitar strings from Joel's guitar are missing. And so, but in Ellie's room, the guitar strings are up. So he clearly de-strung his guitar when he said he would fix her guitar, and struggling with his own guitar strings was very cute. But she finds the guitar strings and serenades Deena with Take on Me. Mike and I talked a lot about the lyrics, why this is such a good choice for a song. Specifically Ellie singing it. But what'd you make of the music store scene, Taran?
This was so interesting to me. And this is, I'm sure you guys talked about it a bit, but it is a scene from the game, but it's an optional scene in the game. If you've played games before, you probably know this, that and if you haven't, then this is sort of how things will sometimes go. But like sometimes you get the option to like sit down in games, and it usually doesn't have a purpose. And sometimes if you can like sit down or you find a thing, you can occasionally just like do a thing as a moment of like relief in the action of the game. And in this one, you can kind of sit down and you can play this guitar and sing this song, and Deena watches. And it's strange because it's the sort of thing in a game where you could theoretically do it for an infinite amount of time. Usually, this kind of thing, you sit down, you can like enjoy the view, and like, oh, it's so pretty, and you just look at the view. Like these kinds of things are meant usually as a sort of like, here's again, take a breather, take as much time as you need, and for that reason, they feel strange. And in the way that they're placed in games is often very interesting. And in this one in particular, clearly was one that made an impact on a lot of people, even if it was maybe even because it was missable. And so because of that, it's not something I would have expected to see in the show, especially not in its full length. She sings the whole song, and we linger, and it feels just like those moments in a video game. It's wild to me, actually, for a show that is so prestigious and to have received so many accolades, to feel almost the most video game like of almost any video game adaptation I think I've ever seen. In such subtle ways too. Some more subtle than others.
The way Seattle looks and the way they're like, we got to climb on that thing, up that thing to get into there, and it's all.
I mean, we'll get to it when they're in the TV station. It's
right.
like ripped straight. I believe Craig Mazin said it's what he did. He did the thing. He just basically filmed the version of how he played that section in the game.
Right.
And so this is something that is so weirdly unique to video games. Is something that I think wouldn't often see in a show, especially a show like this of this genre. And I thought it was great. I thought the performance by Bella Ramsey was really well done. Deena played perfectly, I think, here. And it was just nice. Yeah, I really liked it.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I don't know that much more than I said yesterday, just because I think the song choice is perfect. If you look at the lyrics, why it makes sense for Ellie to be the one singing that song and why she would be sort of attached to it. It's so into the themes of like the risk of loving somebody. It's an incredible choice. And it's just this beautiful thing. I feel like there's been many moments, but I feel like Deena, the way she's sitting cross-legged and how she's looking at Ellie, has been one of those things. I feel like that image is going to be like reshared a million times of just like everybody's loving Deena right now. Both Deena,
find
the
somebody
character,
that looks at you the way Deena looks at Ellie.
Yeah.
When she's singing a song.
Yeah, for real. So I really liked this, and thought it was good that it was in here. We're going to get to this moment where they're going to head into the TV station and they're going to find the WLF soldiers who've been killed by the Saraphites. And as the soldiers come in, and they're going to have to like sneak away and sneak out. Yeah. What'd you make of this, Taran?
I mean, first of all, it just looked incredible.
Yeah.
And horrific. And really, I think, okay. So I think probably one of the primary complaints I've seen of this episode, and perhaps of the season so far, maybe because of this episode, is that they felt there are some viewers who feel as though Ellie and Deena are a little too chipper in general.
Yeah.
And that's actually not a complaint that I have, at least not right now. I disagree with that complaint. I think for many reasons, it makes sense for their characters to be acting in the way that they are. And that's just character-wise. But for the plot, and perhaps even thematically, depending on where they go with it, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think that this is one of those moments where it like really, really works, because they are a little too cavalier about this. And I think we are supposed to feel that a little bit, because it's being, remember, I think that this is an intentional choice being set up by Craig and Neil, that like, when they came into Seattle, they were like, oh yeah, about to be a few less wolves. And then we see an army walking through the streets. We're supposed to see this juxtaposition. And we're supposed to see them being careless with the tank, put right up against, Isaac blowing people up and torturing people. And so when they are kind of like hanging out, having a good time, singing songs, followed by them, invading this TV station and then finding disemboweled bodies hanging from the ceiling, it's like, oh my God, this got real so fast. and there's like this extra layer of vulnerability, I feel, that sort of like is attached to them in this moment. And then when soldiers come in, I was genuinely like, they're screwed.
Me too. I
Like,
was like, this is so scary. Yeah.
yeah, it's terrifying in a way that I feel like shows and movies struggle to do, because you feel like the characters have plot armor. And of course, you know, Joel did not have much armor, but like in a scene like this, you really don't expect something bad to happen to them. Like they're at worst going to be captured, right? Probably. But it still felt like inescapable. How do you get out of here? And I think the reality is that if these had been like properly well-trained soldiers, they probably wouldn't have gotten out of there. And I love the way that they subtly let you know that these are not super well-trained soldiers, because they get in there and they're like, well, aren't we supposed to clear the room first? Like, do you see them? They're hanging. And so you get this thing, and then it's so video game, the way that they start crawling and hiding, and and yeah, I went into my video game version of myself, like, okay, if I were playing this and I had one life, like, you'd be very careful. And it was just so well done. You know, Ellie sneaks upstairs. The soldier comes through, doesn't check his right, and then the way that, like, I still felt like, surely, almost in the same way that I felt like this would happen with Abby when she finds Joel. It was like, oh, surely there'll be some way out of this. Like, they can talk this through. Like, they can explain, hey, we're not Saraphites. We're just passing through, whatever. The soldier finds her, and they just start fighting. And then she freaking knifes him in the neck. And then they get out of there. And it's like, oh my God.
Yeah, shoots the other one. Yeah, it's brutal.
So brutal. And it's, again, I think that there's a juxtaposition here that is making the action feel better. And this is something that is completely separate from how you would experience the game, because in the game, the action is your bread and butter. The action is like you're scared when you're playing the game, but like the action itself doesn't have that much impact, because
you get shot and you're like, oh no, my health, you know?
Yeah. You're like, oh, headshot, nailed that one. Right. In many ways, it like knifing the dude in the neck would be like super satisfying. Not like, oh. And so there are other ways that the game tries to make you feel disgusted with violence, but it has to be way more heavy-handed with it, in a way that I don't think would be as effective in scenes like this. And so I thought this worked so well. And especially them getting out and then going into the tunnel. All of this was really good and really tense. It reminded me of actually a scene that made me really tense recently in Andor, that dropped its second batch of episodes recently.
So I want to go back to like the notion that, you know, Ellie is not, you know, showing her grief. And I totally agree with you in terms of the way Ellie is acting. I feel like it is in line with her character thus far, while still being character development for Ellie, considering that Joel has died. So, I mean, yes, there's a world where like there's a version of Ellie that we get where she's just like super mad all the time, and that is probably more in line with the Ellie from the video game. But I do think that this is, you know, for my money, the way that I view, at the very least, show Ellie, who I think like I'm trying to think about in season 1 about moments where she got angry. I feel like she gets annoyed, but she doesn't get like mad, you know? And I feel like the most mad we've actually seen her in the show, like, correct me if I'm wrong, is when she's mad at, when she yells at Joel at the barn, like on New Year's, like that, when she like tells Joel off for having pushed Seth. I feel like that's like one of the angriest we've seen her. It's not that we haven't seen her be like riled up, and she certainly has like aversion to authority, but I think that there is something here in line with the way that she typically does act. And this makes sense as an extension of the way in which she's processing her grief, specifically about Joel, who she was like not seeing eye to eye with when he died. And so I think that this reaction of like, I'm going to go to Seattle. I don't really know what I'm getting myself into. It's going to be a little bit of a romp. I'm with Deena, who I'm like falling in love with and I'm like fully in like a honeymoon stage with. I think that for my money, this character, the character beats of Ellie and Deena as they're going, I think do make sense. And I guess I like, and I'm seeing a lot of reaction still about Ellie this season about being sort of like an entitled kid, like I'm seeing still a lot of that, which I don't know that you're necessarily like not supposed to think that, but I also think that like there's this version of how people want Ellie's grief to manifest that I think one, it's working for me, but I think I'm also much more in line. I think maybe you are too, with what the show is trying to tell us about how Ellie is processing her grief.
Yeah, and I mean, here's the thing. I think I will give the people that have an issue with it. Ellie is a different character than the Ellie in the game. She just is. In the same way that Joel is a different character, and Tommy is a different character, and Deena is a different character. They're all different.
Yeah.
And so if you were really attached to the specific version of Ellie that was in the game, then your frustration that she is not the same person is, I guess, understandable in that way. But what I don't think that should manifest as is, well, I think she should act this way in this moment because that's how she did in the game, because that wouldn't be in line with her character in the show. Right. It just wouldn't. It is not how Ellie, I think, would respond in the show, especially given the way that they've set things up. And you can have an issue with the way that they've set things up and with the changes that they've made to the character to begin with, sure. But I think this is perfectly in line with how Ellie, and quite frankly, how many people would sort of react to grief. It is, I think, a widely known and accepted thing that people grieve in many different ways. And I think people know that consciously, but unconsciously, they still have a lot of judgment for expressions of grief that don't conform to the ways that they think people should express grief. It is a huge issue, and expressing grief is a huge part of this season of the show. And so, I think that it is perfectly natural and, in fact, quite in line with Ellie's character, the way that she's expressing her grief, the way that Deena's expressing her grief. I mean, think about it. Like, Ellie went through what she did with Riley, before she went through what she did with Joel, and it was the same thing. She had a different sort of like, she didn't have a need for revenge, but she had a similar kind of, mindset afterward. And obviously they're different things. She's much younger and there was a much bigger time gap between when she met Joel afterward. But like, the point is, I think that I don't have an issue with this at all. The other side of it is, if Ellie is too cheerful, are we losing the plot on her desire for revenge? And I think that's something that like is maybe worth exploring, but I don't have a huge issue with it. And I think that, again, the way that both of her and Deena are acting make a ton of sense. And quite frankly, I am a little frustrated with the response to this particular episode in terms of how much of it is just, this isn't what it was in the game.
Yeah.
Because, and I think I wasn't having an issue before because I really liked all of the changes that they were making, and I really enjoyed a lot of the decisions they were doing. This episode, because I have critiques of the end of this episode, it's almost more frustrating to me, all of the critiques that are just, it was this way in the game, and not actual, like, to me, meaningful analysis of, well, here's why I don't think this works in the show on the merits of it being a show, and instead just what about this line, or what about this thing, and so that was. Well, there's more. There's probably even more to talk about.
Yeah,
I get to those scenes, and also when we get to spoilers.
Yeah, I think the spoiler section will do that. I do think, like, I think to a degree, I think the show is setting up a much more. I think there'll be a moment in time where she ends up actually, like, we don't have everybody from Abby and her group. We don't have Caitlin ever on the show for like Ellie to never interact with him again. So I don't think this is like a spoiler to be like they will encounter each other again. And I think once we hit that point, I think like things change for Ellie probably in terms of like how she's feeling about revenge in that moment, in terms of like her response to it might change once it becomes a little more real. I feel like at the moment, like, yeah, she was there when it happened, but also like this idea that it's been a long time. This is my other point, is I know that people a little bit are upset with like, not only does Ellie's grief seem sort of not there, but also it's been 3 months, and supposedly from the not supposedly the time jump. I think this is what people are like trying to argue of, like, but how come we haven't seen anything in relation to that? My argument too is like, I think this is going to be part of what we talk to next as we like wrap up this episode with with the theater scenes, where to some degree Ellie and Deena from the video game rush in to do this. And I think that there has to be a little bit of reframing this as like, I mean, I guess you can still say they rushed to do it and they're kind of like stuck doing it together. That if there is any sort of any less of that, it feels like less of a romp. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting a little bit into where I want to go in the next section, but I agree that I think that like this is working for me, and it doesn't mean that people have to like it. I just think the idea that like just because it's not what the video game was, I think is a little bit like not giving the show credit for I think how it's trying to adapt things. But
exactly, and
yeah.
I think more importantly, and we'll put a pin on this for now after this, but like I think that the critiques of like, well, it was this way in the game, and therefore this is bad, I think don't account for the fact that there are so many changes the show has made that are so much better than the game. Like these Isaac scenes, there are so many things that the show is doing that the game could not or didn't. And some of those things require changes that will take away some of the things from the game. That's inevitable in any adaptation, especially one from different mediums. And so that doesn't mean you have to like it. It doesn't mean you can't complain about a thing that is missing, especially if you think it was warranted to be there. But I think there are some things, like the way that Ellie is acting, that just wouldn't have fit into the show regardless. That's how I feel, at least. And so I think that like saying, well, oh, she should be more sad or mad right now, I just don't feel like is a super useful or interesting critique at the
Can I
moment.
give the best example I think I can tell about, like, I think just how dramatically changes from the game to the show that would, I think, really emphasize the point that you're trying to make about the way that Ellie's grief would manifest, to me, is the DLC where the episode with Riley and Ellie, the game version of that, I believe this is, or maybe I'm misremembering the part. There's a couple times where you have to go like get supplies from somewhere, and maybe I'm thinking it's a DLC because I remember there being a thing with like the plane that's like she's trying to get like into a first aid kit in a plane that's like hovering in the mall, I think. All this is, I guess it doesn't really matter whether it's about when something happened to Joel, when Joel got like impaled in the video, like at the there's the moment there, and then I feel like there's also a thing where she has to like try to find supplies when she's with Riley. All this to say, she kills like 15 human beings as she's going through that thing. Like as you're going through a little like piece, there's like, I remember this vividly because I kept losing and trying to fix it, where you have to like sneak around and shoot bow and arrows to try not like show your gunfire. You kill like 15 to 20 people probably over the course and that's like one little section of the game. And so I say all that to say like death is very different, I think, for Ellie from the video game to the Ellie that we have here. Like there's literally a moment in when they're like going to Seattle where she's like, how many people have you killed? She's like, I don't really want to talk about the first one, but I'll talk about the other one, the person I shot in the pharmacy. And so I think all that to say of like this idea, I think it makes a lot of sense for video game Ellie to be like, I'm going to go on a rampage. I'm going to find the person who did it. I'm going to kill them outright. And for this Ellie, who I think has a little bit more innocence to her, because we didn't play a video game where she killed hundreds of NPCs, to be a little bit more like naive to what she's actually going up against and dealing with. So that leads us to the theater scene, Taran, where as they're running out of the subway.
Well, we skipped the tunnels.
Yes, sorry, the subway. We haven't talked about the subway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just this brought me back.
Yeah.
This playing this in the game. This was scary.
It's scary. Yeah.
And it was scary to watch.
Yeah.
Just really well done. There's not a lot to say here. Just really, really well done. I mean, I haven't seen there's been a lot of zombie content out there over the last few decades, and this I think is up there amongst some of the best. I think that is just really, really good and effective. I loved watching the counting from Deena, and then the horde comes, and then the way that they try to escape, and then even down to the way that Ellie shoves her arm into the mouth of the infected to block it from biting Deena. I thought there's something about that scene where it could have felt so forced, but it didn't. It felt like it was her only option in that moment, and it felt natural and it felt real. And so I was very impressed by that. I know it's a small thing, but those moments of self-sacrifice, oh, it's a big plot point, it has to happen in the action scene, therefore we'll write a scene around the fact that it has to happen. It just felt good, felt natural. So really, really liked it, all of it.
Yeah, I like the sort of the imagery of Ellie literally sort of defending Deena, putting her arm out and being bitten. I think it works really well. We talked about a little bit with Mike that there was some question about whether or not spores would be introduced in the season, which is a thing from the video game. And the moment that this happens in the video game is that Ellie's mask breaks and Deena realizes that it's immune. I think not having set up the spores and then having to try to set them up to then have this moment where Deena's like, oh no, those are spores, and also I know that would get sick if I encountered them, but you clearly are fine. I think it's too complicated, and the bite works, and I think it's better maybe than the broken mask. So I don't mind it at all, but I don't know what you.
Yeah, so I think this leads us into sort of the theater, which also, by the way, just it's wild just how I played this game 5+ years ago.
Yeah.
And I, quite frankly, don't always remember all the details until I sometimes have to look them up. But
Yep.
I saw this theater and I was like, there it is.
The theater. Yeah.
I remember that theater. And it's not just that, it's it's the music store. All of these places just feel so immediately recognizable. So they get into the theater, and Deena holds the gun on Ellie. Okay, so here's how they did it in the game. As Grace described, in the same situation, they ran into spores. Spores in the game are an airborne thing. They have to wear gas masks. They have not introduced us to this in the show, but we'd been introduced to it since the beginning of game one. So this is a very known thing. Ellie's gas mask is broken, or something along those lines. She ends up giving Deena the working gas mask. Deena then tries to be like, oh my God, let's try to share. And Ellie's like, no. And she's like, what do you mean? I'm not just going to let you die, Ellie.
I think they're just each wearing masks. Ellie's breaks. Dina's like, it's okay, we'll share. Goes to take hers
Right.
out. And Ellie's like, no, 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 no. Yeah.
Like, no, don't do that.
Yeah.
And then she rips hers off. She's like, see, I'm immune. I'm not coughing. I'm not like immediately getting sick, which is what would happen with the spores. And so Dina's like, well, I don't know. And they just run off. And
they do then go to the turnstile, and there is a moment where like Ellie gets grabbed and Deena shoots an infected, and they like get to the theater together. So the turnstile things are not like, they are there. They're just, it's not about the moment. Yeah.
And so they get there, and then Ellie sort of explains like, yeah, so I'm immune. And she says, what do you mean you're immune? What does that mean? And Ellie says like, this is how it is. Like Joel and Tommy know, well, Joel knew. And then Dina's like, oh my God, the chemical burns. Like, yeah, that was a bit before. And then Deena kind of goes quiet, and Ellie's like, were you going to say something? And then she says, I think I'm pregnant. And in the game, Ellie gets mad. She's like, are you serious? Like, how long have you known? She's like, I don't know. I was like a couple of weeks late. She's like, a couple of weeks? We go to turn back? Like what are we going to do now? She's like, I don't know. I didn't know for sure. I didn't want to be a burden. Like, well, you are a burden. And that's kind of like the scene, like, right, that's the game version of it. And that's part of where people are sort of saying like, why isn't Ellie angrier? They really wanted the you're a burden line. I don't care about any of that. Again, that just is not in Ellie's character in the show. I wouldn't expect it from the show version of Ellie. And if I got it from the show version of Ellie, I would have been like, that doesn't make sense to her character to me right now. But what I did find interesting, especially going back and rewatching the scene from the game, is that I was wondering if it had the same issues that I felt I had with the show, and I don't think it did. So I had a couple of nitpicks and a couple of like slightly bigger issues. One of the nitpicks is that like Ellie seemed like she forgot that she just got bit in front of Deena. Like she was just like, oh right, oh yeah, I forgot the bite. Oh yeah, that thing. That was a little strange. I would have expected Ellie to be like more on top of that, and I don't think there's a reason for her not to have been. I get that they were like frantic and whatever, but I felt like it could have and should have been more top of mind. Then like you get to the explanation, all of that kind of tracks. Like, okay, well, just watch me sleep. I really actually liked this. I'm gonna go to sleep. You hold the gun over me. This is the same way that Joel sort of confirmed that she was immune back in season 1. So the fact that she's offering it to Deena, like, hey, do this thing, I thought was really a really good choice. Liked that. Then she wakes up and shows the bite, and I just felt like we just kind of glossed over the immunity thing from that point forward. And instead we go to Deena, I'm pregnant, into we're getting it on, into I'm going to be a dad, into let's go. We have news. And we never really got back to the immunity thing. And that just felt so weird to me because it's kind of earth-shattering news.
Yeah. So actually, this is a great. I felt like I basically liked everything that happened up until they sleep together. Basically, like that's
Right.
like the sleep together thing is the moment where I'm like, tonally, it's actually a little bit like so to actually give some credit to the feedback that I think we've been talking about that I feel like is like disingenuous of like that's not how they are in the show. I do feel like this is the level of news that I feel like warrants the type of response that I think the show did give. But I fully, especially when we're talking with Mike, I kept being like, yeah, they're young and they're like, and so like, fine, whatever, it is what it is. But I do think you're like hitting on something, which is that like, which is, similar to where I was feeling at first, which is like, yeah, this is pretty big. It's two huge pieces of information. And Deena probably like, and it's not that I need her to be like anything other than super inquisitive about what that means and how much Joel, like I think they could have. So we do eventually, and then there's some stuff in here that I do love, which we're gonna get to sort
Yeah.
of like Deena and Ellie talking about Deena's sexuality and Deena giving some backstory
Mhm.
stuff that I have talked about with Mike that I thought is really, really great. And to give the very brief note on it, I think that this is, I understand that people want the sort of like carefree, I'm queer and I'm a lesbian and who cares thing, or I'm bi, she's bi. Like who cares? I don't know. I quite like that this is like a queer story that feels extremely realistic and that also doesn't feel like it lingers too much on like there's enough sort of like internalized homophobia here, and homophobia from her mother in a way that I think is like the right amount for like how
Mhm.
realistic it is versus the like, no, I never care and I don't care what anybody else thinks. And I get that
And
people want that, and also, I think we'll get there.
we saw, and this is from the game as well, but like we see the pride flags, and they
Yeah.
don't even know what that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's very interesting. And again, like the world stopped at 2003 in
Yeah.
this world.
No.
And so it of course makes sense that there would be a lot of existing homophobia, but in a space where it like, how often is it really going to manifest in this world? Like there's not a lot of community anyway.
Yeah, it's funny because
Um,
you'd get two things. You'd get the like, it suddenly like there is no societal reason maybe for people who felt that reason to
mhm.
for there to be like for that to exist. I can see the world where like in some communities there would be none of it because you're like, who cares? It's an apocalypse, like whatever,
Right.
And in other
It's like if
ways,
you're xenophobic, it's like, well, it doesn't really come up much anymore.
that's right.
You
Whereas
know, like
on the other hand, you can see where it actually would get entrenched because it remained the status quo, you
right.
know? Yeah.
And so from her mother, it makes a lot of sense
I
that that's where it come from. And of course, I would imagine from her mother, from her perspective, a place of love would be, I think, where
I
she thought it was coming from, right?
and a
Um,
sense of protection. I know, like, when I
mhm,
tell this story a lot, and, like, I always caveat this because I heard my mom heard me say it one time. I don't think she's listening to this podcast, but she heard me say it one time, and I, like, didn't say how great she's been since then, which is fine. But my mom was like, "What if you" basically, like, "What if you get fired from your job? What if you get kicked out of your house? What if you don't find some" what, like, all of the things. And so her instinct
mhm.
was, like, not to say, "Don't be out," but to, like, naturally be worried about those things. And that always doesn't come out, like, in the way that it's meant, and it does suck when you get told like, no, not like that. But on the other hand, like in a world where murder might actually be like, you're certainly more likely to get away with a murder if you do, or like anything, or like there's less of a society. So the idea that like in some societies you would then not want your kid to come out because the lawlessness that could be inflicted upon your child, your child might be at more risk by being out in a society where there's less structure. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, and I saw some complaints about like, why did this have to be an explicitly laid out thing? Why couldn't it have just been implied? But that doesn't track to me because this felt like a very natural conversation that these two people would have after hooking up for the first time, and sort of like, I mean, it's very much like the classic kind of like, so that just happened, let's reevaluate the last like bits of our relationship and how we got here and why. Like, because now we're finally admitting to each other like what's happening.
yeah.
And so like
Are you saying that
what's
in a way that
happening, Dina?
you're saying that in a way that makes that you think it makes sense for the show, or that it feels
That
because
it made sense.
okay, great, yeah, because
Yeah, I think,
she's pregnant with like Jesse's
yeah,
kid,
like there's a
like
lot to explain there, and a
yeah,
lot for especially Ellie to like get on the same page for.
yeah,
In the same way that I thought they also should be talking about.
yes,
Okay,
yes,
now that
yes.
we've
This is
talked
why I
about
went down
me,
this. Yes, this is why I went down this road.
Ellie,
Mhm.
immunity,
Yeah,
like.
that's right. Which may, to be fair, like maybe that is coming the beginning of next episode. So like and like
I just
probably
I
still.
feel
I
like
agree with
if
you.
that's the case, they should have swapped it and had this conversation about sexuality perhaps after, and then the immunity stuff. Because here's the thing, the immunity just feels more pressing, especially given like the fact that she was just bit and the intense physical contact that came right after. Like,
I still have a problem with it. Can I argue that it's actually the opposite? That to me it's not as
please.
pressing in the sense that like there's a baby now. Like there's a baby. Like technically the immunity thing actually doesn't change. It changes now like my perception of like whether you're actually it's interesting that their perceptions of how much danger they're both in have actually like dramatically shifted in the sense that like Ellie is now like perceivably in far less danger from the things that they might be afraid, like one of the main things that they might be afraid of, which is infected. Whereas you know, and we get this in this
Ellie's
last
going to be
moment.
like, Deena, you're never going to believe this, but I've got one really good trick for you if you want to really protect that baby.
That's right. That's right. And then like it's going to manifest in the last scene where like actually Ellie at least feels like Deena is in a far less safe place. Like they're risking not just Deena's life, but also the life of a baby. So I think that like kind of the like conversation, like the focus on it being about the baby, I think I don't mind. I guess what I'll say is I don't mind. I don't mind the order of operations, but I am acknowledging that it is weird that it does not get talked about at all.
So yeah. So here's the thing: the game doesn't do much different in terms of how long they spend talking about it. If anything, they seemingly spend more time on it in the show version than they do in the game. But the game's dialogue in regards to her immunity felt more natural to me, in the sense that Ellie very quickly sort of answers all the like frequently asked questions that Deena would have, right? Like she immediately is like, yes, here's the people that know back in Jackson. I was bit before a long time ago. No, I can't get you infected. No, I can't cure you. And like just getting through all of these things, these like just basic questions, so that when you see Deena sort of like get like taking all of that in, it kind of makes sense that she eventually then gets to, okay, all of that makes sense. Now I feel this burden of having to tell you, I think I'm pregnant. Whereas to me, not enough of those questions were answered before Deena went for I'm pregnant. And then certainly not enough of them were answered. Like, I think for as much as you can maybe make it make sense, and I think that there are ways, and I don't think the scene failed. I think that it was just a little rough around the edges for me. But like the bottom line is, when Deena like jumps Ellie, my first thought was like, whoa, aren't you worried about getting infected? Like she has an active bite right now. Like you don't know how any of this works. Like she's immune, but that doesn't mean that it might not be transferred via the mouth, you know, where the bites happen right now.
Didn't we
Like
also see it? Doesn't she have to pick? Where does she get bit and she has to pick stuff out of her thing?
That was earlier in the season with the bite from the stomach.
Yeah.
There's like a thing in there. That was literally what I was thinking of, was like the bite's right there. Who knows, like if it's still coming out of the bite, like is it gonna, like, you know, her hands going into some places, like this seems dangerous, and I know about the immunity and how it works.
Yeah. And it's a thing of like, well, they're doing it, and so I don't think it's going to be a thing about like, you know, there's some plot armor to a degree, you know. So, but
I just think just a couple of lines would have gone a long way for me here, and I think the game is a perfect example of that, because I saw some people saying like, oh, it's pretty similarly, like Deena doesn't really ask any questions in the game either, and I was like, oh, I guess it's pretty similar, and I expected to go back and have this criticism, because as you know, if you listen to this podcast, I'm not really a person that often says I think the game did it better and it should have been this way. So I expected to go back and watch this scene from the game and be like, okay, so this is how they did it in the game. So to be fair to the show, it was faithful to the game. I just disagree with both decisions. But I actually did think they made it work in the game, and it really just came down to a few of those small expository lines that just naturally made sense to me as like answering all those immediate questions, getting them out of the way. so that it opened the door for the rest of the stuff to happen. And I think that if that had been the case, it would have worked better for me. I think probably what happened here is that they were going for that surprise reveal. They were going for that like lantern in my face. You don't know what I'm thinking yet. I'm pregnant. Boom, bam, like right, all happening at once. And I just don't think it worked for me. I think it just didn't quite land in the way that I think they wanted it to, at least for me, for those reasons, and not for the reasons that I wanted Ellie to say that she's a burden.
My
Yeah.
my critique was, and I know this is going to sound silly, and actually when I said it first, Mike was like, you're right, which is, I said it feels very TV. And then he was like, well, HBO always says they're not TV, so it works out. But I know it sounds silly about a television show, but there's a way in which it feels like the worst instincts of like, we are making a
Yeah.
television show, so we shall have a moment that feels like it's on a television show, instead of what I think that this show has felt so much like, which is a very like grounded character based exploration of people surviving in this world. And so yeah, I again, a lot of what I can like sort of wave my hands at is like, they're young and immature and foolish. Like, I can put that in that box. It doesn't change that. As I was watching it, I was like, I don't know if I
Well,
like it.
yeah.
So
I think that's the thing, is that like the best explanation for like the drama of it is that they are young and therefore like prone to that kind of melodrama. Um, but the issue is that I am not young, and so I don't think they wanted you to be like, oh, look at these people being a little, dramatic. I think they wanted you to be in it with them. I think they
yeah,
wanted us to feel the same level of drama and excitement. And for that reason, again, I don't think it works. It can't have both, if that makes sense.
yeah. I also think one thing that I think to some degree, maybe you wonder sometimes if they weren't like trusting in what they had a little bit. I think people are, well, and maybe they are reading it in a way that I'm just like, where people do love Deena. I don't know that I've seen a ton of like, oh, I love Deena and Ellie together. That look, I don't know.
I mean, I
For
I've
show
definitely this
show
is
version, yeah,
yeah.
show,
So
yeah,
there's a thing I think that is pretty obvious. I've seen some people talk about it. That is happening, and it feels weird to even talk about because it feels like I'm then participating in some small way in the conversation. But like a lot of people take issue with Bella Ramsey's looks.
mhm,
That they are not primarily they are not, they don't look like Ellie from the game. But I think also what Deena is kind of showing us, who also doesn't look like Deena from the
no,
game.
does not.
But I think in the eyes of the people that are complaining, in the opposite direction, that Deena is prettier than Deena from the game, whereas Bella Ramsey is not prettier than Ellie in the game. And I think that the way that people are responding to their performances and their characters is from what I feel like I'm reading, like pretty closely attached to that, even if you're not explicitly talking about it.
I have a thing where I think Bella Ramsey looks quite young, and then I will like look up their age and be like, oh no, they're like in line with what this should be. So it's just that like and then I have a thing where I think like a lot of the like, Ellie's an entitled child is a lot, because like I do think if you look at the character model from the game, Ellie looks older, and I feel like looks there's and so I think that that's also playing into some stuff that I think but alas.
Mhm.
Anything else we should dive probably into our second part of this podcast? Will be fully spoiling the rest of the second game. But anything else before we do that, Taran?
Let's open it up.
All right, let's dive right in. So we're giving some people a chance to head out. If you are leaving, just a reminder, Mike and I will be back next week for the episode 5 immediate aftermath sort of reaction podcast. And then I'll be back a week from now. And thanks so much for listening. Where do you want to start in this sort of like spoiler section, Taran?
I guess we could start where we just left off. We can talk about that ending scene, and then we can go back to structure, which we talked about at the beginning of the podcast.
Yes.
Afterward, yeah. So let's just like I guess stick here, um, in terms of like what could we not talk about when we were having that discussion just now?
Oh, well, look, can I start? So one thing I think, like, to kind of go back to like this, like the like, is her grief the way we thought it would be? I don't need to revisit that discussion, but I do think as soon as the hunt for one of these people and like it happens, I think we will get I think we'll get like a change in Ellie in terms of like how good that felt. That was a big
Yeah.
theme in season 1, was sort of like the satisfaction she was getting from killing people. And so if you think about the way in which like there's been significantly less killing on Ellie's part, I mean, she's shooting infected, but she's not killing a lot of humans, you know? And
Mhm.
so when that happens, I think that will be a dramatic shift where I can start to see them building back that tension, or I guess not building it back in, building it in for the first time, of like Deena and Ellie having a little bit of that conflict, in the sense that Ellie will be like hyper fixated on this revenge tour that she'll want to go on. I don't know if that
Yeah,
tracks.
and I think that something that the game, and I think a lot of stuff is attached to this, in terms of it being a game and displaying the character and scenes from the game versus a show. But I think also having Ellie, this a whole notion of her being like super chipper, I don't think is even necessarily fair. I think that
I totally.
compared to her from the first season, she is still a lot more somber. And I think that, like, again, I think that it's that comparison to Ellie in the game, instead of comparison to Ellie from season 1, is harming people's viewing of season 2, because the show is only referring to itself, not the game, when they're writing it. And so when you are referring to the game and comparing it to that, instead of comparing it to where Ellie was back in season 1 of the show, I think that like, this isn't being written for you to be interpreting it in that way. Um, but obviously that can be a hard thing to do sometimes. But I think that having Ellie be a little more positive, and way more positive in this particular scene. Again, not calling Deena a burden, instead being seemingly excited to, like, maybe be a thruple and raise
Mhm.
raise a baby. Um, is an interesting change to me. Something that I think very naturally plays off of decisions made and her character, and so might have been done just for that reason, but also because it's giving more, it's giving Ellie more to lose in over the course of this, because some people are like, oh, they're chickening out, they're making this more positive, they're not diving deep into like the melancholy and the misery that was the game. But by doing this, I found myself for the first time in the show being like, can we turn back now? Basically, like, when they get the message on the walkie-talkie, and it's like, oh, here's a person that like can tell us where Abby is. I was like, oh, I kind of forgot about that whole situation. Like,
Yeah.
this
Mhm.
this other stuff, like, this was a whole like little like road trip journey that got really scary, and now we're talking about immunity, and now we're talking about a baby, and it's like, oh, right, that's why we're here for Abby, who hasn't even been in the show
No.
since what happened.
Yep.
And I was like, uh, do we have to?
Mhm.
Which is interesting, because I've talked before about how they really revved me up to want to do this in the
Right.
past 2 episodes.
Right.
And now all of a sudden I'm like, actually, I feel like I don't want this to be messed up.
Yeah.
Um, and like, giving us something to want and to hope for and to root for, I think is interesting. I don't know that it is like the best decision, but I do know that in the game I felt immense apathy all the time.
Mhm.
I wasn't that interested in going after Abby in the first place, and then when Ellie was being such a douche to Deena, I was like, well, come on. like there just wasn't enough there. It wasn't until later when they like have this like idyllic sort of like little house together that I was like, oh, this is nice. But they made it clear that like it was never even tenable. Like she couldn't even exist there.
Yeah.
She was constantly having these like PTSD flashbacks. So it was like they were presenting a world where there wasn't any other option. That like the only thing Ellie could do was to go and do this. And in many ways, then what it became was that like there's nothing to lose. Then like all of this is happening because it has to happen, and there's no alternative. And that is a way to tell this story. And some people might say they prefer that way to tell this story. But it didn't work for me, and I'm wondering if this is going to work better. Because I am starting to now feel that same thing. Like the drive to do the Abby thing has diminished in me, and for that reason, or because of that, what is my drive to watch the show? like, in the same way that I felt a lack of drive to play the game. But in this version, at least, I think my drive is: can we get back to can we hold on to this? Can we maybe lose as little as possible in this journey to hold on to what's happening here with Deena? And that attachment and hope, I think, is something that is important to me right now, and I'm curious to see how it is moving forward. But it's something that I think again is it's a change in how the story is being told, but not one that I think is necessarily negative, and in fact might be a positive, at least for me.
I think the thing that I like about it is just how much I think it can play into the themes of the show, which, if we look at the what's like, this is such a huge change, but there's a change in terms of the way in which she's calling herself like dad,
Yeah.
They gave Tommy a kid, which I felt was a little bit like, it playing into the theme of fatherhood and just like, and parenthood at the very least, like just adding more depth to that. And I kind of see this as a continuation of that. And it's not like it wasn't like, it's not so different, but it is a different bit of dynamic there, where even you can see immediately the way in which Ellie's sort of willingness to bring Deena on. I think that's the piece of this last scene where she's like, I don't think you should come with me, basically. And that's her parental instinct thing kicking in a way that obviously like Deena, like they butt heads even just briefly there for a minute. But I think that's another reason why I think that this change in it works fairly well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you reminded me that like, so I think there's two approaches to this. Again, like the way that it's done in the game, and this is why I'm not saying it's necessarily a positive change, although I do think it is smoother and potentially more devastating in the way that they're telling it now. But like, obviously, like Ellie's relationship with Deena is a reflection of Joel's relationship with her.
Right.
In the sense that like Deena represents what Ellie represented to Joel, at least in some way, as like something good. Something that that if she would only open herself up to it, she could have and be happy with. And the story of Joel was slowly opening himself back up to that, and the danger of that, like what that
Right.
meant for him to
Right.
do that. Whereas in the game, in Last of Us 2, it was kind of the opposite. It was kind of like, well, Ellie opening herself up to Deena is like what she just absolutely should be doing, and by closing herself off, she is damning herself and others and everyone around her. And so in this telling, where she isn't really that closed off to Deena, at least not right now. And at least like we're seeing more of like who Ellie could be if she didn't continue down this path. I think that again, we're probably still telling that same sort of thing, but in a way that is less, again, less forced, more so a choice by Ellie. And again, potentially more devastating when she makes the choice to dive into this, chaos, this violence. And if anything, I'm wondering if we will be more mad at Ellie for making the decisions that she does than we were in the game, because we were just so kind of numb to it. Um, I think this opens the door for a lot of possibilities in storytelling moving forward.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a again, because there's that, like, I think we're gonna more quickly see sort of the loss of innocence,
Mhm.
as we go along, in a way that will feel more jarring. Then again, I just reiterate the point of, like, you kill a lot of people in the video games, and we just, like, don't kill that many people in the show thus far, especially humans. Like, not, remove any infected, because I think there's, like, a difference there, that I think once it starts happening, I think you will start to see, um,
How much? Yeah.
yeah,
How much more horrified will you be watching Ellie torture and kill someone
yeah,
in the show
yeah,
versus the game, given the Ellie that we see right now? Because
yeah,
while I think it's perfectly natural for Ellie to be acting the way that she is and expressing the grief in the way that she is in the show right now, I still also think it's perfectly natural for her character to torture and kill someone right now. There is still a lot of grief and anger that she is repressing at the moment. And it, I think, will be terrifying to see that unveiled.
and they've made this decision to, like, time jump in the show that I also think is important here, in the way in which, like, I do think if it was immediate, like, I'm leaving and I'm so hyper focused on doing this thing, that's different than spending some time sort of, like, being fine, and then having, like, I think what we're going to see is, like, the first time she, presumably even next episode, if she meets up with one of them and something happens between them, of, like, a reenacting of that same Ellie we saw, who would, you know what? When I said earlier we hadn't seen her angry, the angriest we probably have actually ever seen her is obviously when Joel is dying and she's yelling
Mhm.
that I'm going to get revenge. And I think that, like, being back in something like that is the moment that we'll see that sort of awakened. Um, the other thing, I don't, do we want to, is there anything else on Ellie and Deena, or do we want to, there's some Isaac stuff that I want to just touch on
Well,
briefly.
let's just touch on the structure stuff that we were sort of alluding to at the start of the podcast, where um, I think what this episode has shown us is that we are probably just not getting much, if any, Abby for the rest of the season. Um,
So it so again, if one episode has to be, so again, the preview does not look like next week is a flashback episode, and I actually, again, don't know that it makes sense based on the ending of this episode. I feel like we get a pretty distinct, like, call to act in terms of, like, we're
mhm.
gonna go. I think is it Nora on the phone? Like, there's word of
I think
Nora
that's her
on the
name. Yeah.
walkie. It'd be tough. My mom's name is Nora. Might be tough for me to watch Nora die on TV. Um, uh, I think if we sort of, like, continue on this train, some people are debating whether the explosion could have been Tommy and Joel. Not Tommy and Joel, Tommy and Jesse. Sorry,
Mhm.
I don't know that tracks. I was a little bit surprised that we didn't get, like, anything again from them this episode, but not a complaint. Um, so what's next week is 5. Is the
I
flashback?
mean,
I think it's probably 6. I guess it could be 7, but that feels weird as the finale. But maybe it is. Maybe that is the. I don't know.
given that we just did day one in an episode, it makes
Yeah,
sense
that's
to
yeah.
me that with 4 episodes left, or sorry, with 3 episodes left, you have day two, day three, and flashback, not necessarily in that
In
order.
that order.
Um, uh, but like, I guess the main thing is that we speculated a lot, especially last season, that like we would probably just get the Ellie and Abby storyline simultaneously, rather than all Ellie at first and then swap to all Abby. But given the current structure of the season, it does seem as though, and we started to suspect this, given all the news before the season started, and then all of that. But like, it seems like fully confirmed now, basically, that we are not starting Abby's story properly until season 3. And we are going to follow the same structure that the game did by basically completely swapping perspectives. And Ellie will just not be in a good chunk of season 3, which is very interesting to me,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that structure did not work for me playing the game at all. I found it to be very frustrating and quite dull. um, and very, very, very see-through as well. And so I'm curious to see if I feel the same way, if they do it the same way, or if they still are going to make small changes that might change how I felt about that. Um, and also just like in general, like, because again, it's like if you start season 3 and it's like, here's Abby's season, how many viewers after like 2 to 3 years of waiting are going to be like, yeah, I'm super pumped to watch Abby, like this character I hate who was in 2 to 3 episodes of season 1. Like, I don't know. It's a very strange and interesting choice for a TV show.
Yeah. I mean, I think they've been helped quite a bit by it being Caitlin Dever, but I don't know how many people are like seeing I don't, like she's not like A-list celebrity name. And there has been like, the photo shoot with her, Pedro and Bella, I think is like very, it's good, but also like I don't think many people are like checking it out. So I would agree with you that it will be a little bit of a thing. I do feel like for what it's worth, I feel like, Mason's locked into this is how he wrote the story. And he has been willing to deviate, but he doesn't he really doesn't deviate that much. Like he explored deeper, I would say, than he diverted, I guess. And so yeah, I think he'll just try to do it again, I think. But we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else there? Anything? I think I agree. I mean, yeah, I mean, it really be. I think the only other thing is like I'm not sure in terms of like if next episode is okay. So next episode is 5. If that's about tracking Nora down and torturing Nora, and then there's another whole episode where you can kill Mel and Owen, like pregnant Mel, which that's going to be interesting in the wake of like the pregnancy stuff here, and then a flashback episode. That's basically it. It does feel like you probably need. I feel like they should probably put a little bit more Abby
Well, I
into at
think
least some of into the finale.
I'm
Probably.
sure. I would assume Tommy and Jesse show up. I know, and they have some interactions. Tommy has some interactions with Abby. Um, So like she could still pop up, I think, and quite frankly, I think she needs to. I think it's important for her to show her face,
Mhm.
especially in a villainous way in this season again.
Yes.
Um, so I would expect some Tommy stuff. I would expect, yeah, and you also because like Tommy does like it's like Tommy tortures some people. He runs into Abby, and I think that all of that fits into this season, right? And that was the first half. This was this portion of the game too. I don't know. I get it's mixed up in my head sometimes.
Yeah, I'm trying
I don't
to
think they wait till the Abby section to get the Tommy stuff,
right. Well,
or
that's
maybe they
why
do. Actually, I don't remember now.
I don't know. That's what we're talking about. Like, is there a world where the explosion is like that Tommy Jesse stuff that like starts to play into the season kind of before we maybe get uh more of it than it showed up in the game, but I don't know.
I mean, that's the other part about the structure to me is that like not only are you then going to a different perspective,
Mhm.
we're also like going back in time. It's like
Yeah, that's
we
true.
I already like kind of saw what happens here. Like it's just the same 3 days, but like from a person I don't. Okay, that's fine. Whatever, we'll do it.
Is the part that's tricky is the like I mean I think that maybe one of the better indicators is I don't think they've cast the like Lev.
Yeah,
Um
that's the big thing I've seen is that we haven't seen any casting for Lev, which I mean, yeah, I don't think you. I think there's still stuff you could do
yeah.
before then, but or could have done, but at the pace they're going and at the where we are in the season. I just yeah, it doesn't seem like it's happening.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, while we're on Saraphite stuff, there's some reason to think that maybe this woman who uh, Isaac shakes hands with could be the prophet who has been mentioned numerous times over the course of these episodes, and would make Isaac's speech where he's talking about like she's just a woman, she's not anything special. Could be interesting here. I guess I'm wondering like I do really feel like when you sort of just like the high level notes here on like things that happen in terms of this portion, to fill it 2 more episodes, I do think you like and I do feel like they're pretty sparse with this stuff, it feels like, like, you know, in the last few episodes last week we got the Gale and Tommy scene and this and the kind of the Gale and Ellie scene at the beginning, and this episode we got 2 Isaac scenes. That's basically all we do to like we're really not like going over here for extended period of time. But I think in those 2 episodes, if you're I think certainly Tommy and Jesse stuff and then maybe more Isaac stuff. But that could just be a note that like I don't think I don't really think there's a need to flash back much with like I feel like we got a healthy dose of Isaac backstory that we don't need to be in like Isaac scenes that aren't in relation to other people to do that much.
I agree. I
With it.
think that I get the theory. It does make sense. Again,
I
those
think it's
people
fun more than it is like I need to see it on my show.
right. Like those people were pretty creepy.
Yeah.
The way that they walked up. So it does make sense that maybe this was like the early Seraphites led by the prophet, and this was the like shaky alliance with which that they built with the then eventual leader of the WLF. That they formed this truce. They ousted Fedra together, and then things broke apart. So like, yeah, you could sort of see that. I do think I believe that the WLF also. I don't think Isaac was the original leader of that. I think that they were originally led by like a man and a woman. So like
Right.
theoretically, you could say that this was still
Yeah.
all the WLF, and
Yep.
this was the woman. But again, like the creepiness with which they walked up and all of that, like, it does kind of imply that this is perhaps the beginning of that truce. If that's the case, I agree with you. I don't know that we need to keep seeing more of this play out. I think that there's a lot of implied story that happens when they say you broke the truce. No, you broke it first. That we don't need to see the betrayal of, or I think even worse, like, oh, it was something trivial that caused this rift to happen, or it was an accident, or like and now all of this is happening because of this one stupid moment. Like, I feel like I've seen that 1,000 times. It doesn't matter, I think, why they broke apart.
What if it's like, you know, maybe someone's lying on their deathbed and they're like, this thing, and they're like, oh my, that's not what
Oh
I
no, they
thought,
misinterpret
and they
it.
misinterpret it, and that's the whole thing. My son should be
um
the son that I name should be the one that is in
mm.
charge of the W. He's like,
If
I
that
heard
would,
it.
if it's that, I guess it would be okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't have any reason to doubt the writers on this. If they include it, it'll probably be good, but my instinct is that it doesn't need to be there, and in fact, thematically, I think it's stronger if it's not. But we'll see.
Yeah, I think is it show don't tell? I guess you would be showing in the flashbacks, but I feel like less is more maybe is the better one.
Mhm.
I'm very excited for Jeffrey Wright to be on the show. That I think is
Yes.
phenomenal. Anything else? I don't.
I think we've gone pretty deep on this
Okay,
one.
great. All right, we will be back next week with another deep dive of season 2, episode 5. Make sure you're following us on you're following us in the podcast feed of choice, and we're on YouTube as well. And until then, bye bye.